If you're looking for a photo editing tool that could give your photos that extra wow factor, then the sunflare filter could be it. I've used this lens flare sunbeam technique to great advantage in commercial photography, landscape photography, my wedding photography, all to great success. And in this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do it too. In the past, I've used Photoshop to achieve this look, but it's time consuming. Now I've got a much better method which is quicker and better, and I'm going to share that with you. If you don't have this software and you're serious about photo editing, I seriously recommend you look at it. It's called Luminar 3, and if you want to get yourself a copy, I do have a discount code for you as well. So without further ado, let's dive in. Step 1. The most important thing when you're adding a sunflare, sunray effect is to find a photograph that actually suits adding in a sunflare. If you try adding this effect to something that it doesn't suit, doesn't look like it should be there, then it's going to look weird. People aren't going to buy into what you're creating visually. So here we have on my screen just a selection of images I shot the other night down at the park. Finn's having nice cuddles with Maisie there. Maisie, incidentally. Maisie, come here, darling. It's Maisie now. We want to choose one of these photographs for adding a sunflare that already has a sun in it. So if we're looking at these images here, we can see that the sun's setting behind where my daughter is swinging across the park there, and they would be ideal to enhance the sunflare that is already there. We can add those light rays, we can really take the photo to the next level. So let's see how we can do that. The second thing you want to do is to actually add a filter into Luminar, which is going to enable you to get your photograph to a really nice base starting point. So the first thing we're going to do is add a raw develop filter. We are going to auto correct any lens distortion, chromatic aberration, just tick all that stuff. Awesome. The most important things we're going to deal with here though are in the adjust category here, where we can play with exposure to bring it up, take it down. I want this to remain a fairly silhouetted image, so I'll take that exposure down a little bit, maybe even increase the contrast. Drop the highlights down so we're making sure we keep all the detail in the sky. Let's bring the whites up just a little bit so things aren't getting too muddy, and I don't think we need to do anything with the blacks. Let's bring the shadows up just a tiny bit. Like I say, we want to keep things relatively silhouetted, but I don't mind having a little bit of detail in there just for visual interest. And I think bringing the clarity slider up here, yeah, that helps with that as well. Number 3, make sure we're happy with the color balance. So that's how warm or cool the image is feeling. Because we're dealing with a sunset image here, I really feel that we want to make sure that we're sticking on the warmer side of things. So if I grab that temperature slider and crank that up, we can see that we really can go towards that orangey hue very quickly. If we're getting too yellow, we can add in a little more magenta, and we could say pretty happy with that. Nice. Step number 4. Here we get to be a little creative. We're going to add in some of our favorite or your favorite Luminar filters, which help to just give the photograph your secret sauce, your recipe, a little sprinkling of digital magic which is unique to you. And Luminar is a fantastic tool for doing that because it's got so many great filters that we can just play around with. Let's add in some golden hour. As soon as we are shooting at golden hour, okay, that's really enhancing the oranges, but it's a little too much, isn't it? But we could play just a smidge of that. Now let's see what else we can put in there. Maybe some fog. One reason I would like to introduce fog in some of my images with sun rays is because for the rays to actually show up, there needs to be atmosphere for the light to be being caught in. So if things are a bit foggy, that helps with the believability of that aesthetic. So let's grab that amount slider and just bring it up a tints. let's go with that. I like that. That's giving us a good starting point. Potentially we could throw in a bit of image radiance. Let's have a slide of this. Okay, that softens everything up and gives it a nice dreamy quality. I sometimes like to add this in. Let's go for about 20 on that. Brighten things up just a smidge. Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to say I'm happy with that and ready to move on to the next step. Step number 5. Now this step is the fun bit. This is where we get to actually add the sun flare, the sun rays. So rather than adding this in our current workspace, what we're going to do is actually add a new layer and add it in there. We could just click sun rays and start working within the current workspace and not on a new layer. But the benefit of adding a new layer means that any changes we make with that sun flare, that is then, we can then dial that back. If it's too much, we can dial it back individually. Whereas if it's included with all these other changes, the raw develop, image radiance, etc., when we grab the filters amount slider at the bottom, if we were to do that and try and reduce the sun flare, we're going to be reducing everything that we've done. So we want to leave these alone, and we're going to come up and go layers, add a new layer, add a new adjustment layer, and for the sake of thoroughness, let's call this sun rays so we don't get confused. And we're going to come down to sun rays, add the filter, and we have a very unbelievable burst of light up in the top by my son's head. So the next challenge is how are we going to make this sun flare look realistic. Guys, if you're enjoying this video and finding it helpful, you can really do me a favor just by hitting that like button and give me a subscribe too. That would be awesome. If you've got any feedback for me, whatever it may be, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Thank you very much. Step number 6. So the first thing we want to do to start things off is place sun center. So let's click that, and we can actually grab the center of the sun and we can move it around. Now the great thing about this is you'll notice as I move this past my sun, Luminar is actually smart enough to realize that he is an object in the way of that sun. And that's one of the reasons why I think this is such a cool filter. You can create this effect in Photoshop, and I actually have a video on how to do that, and it is time consuming. It looks really cool doing it in Photoshop, but it is time consuming, and you would need to mask that people out, objects out, whether it's mountains, trees, whatever it is that the sun is coming past, you need to work with a mask. Whereas Luminar is smart enough to know where people are. So let's bring this center point right down where our sun is setting. Could be as low as already set potentially, but let's just bring it in here. And again, as I move it around my daughter's legs there, you can see that the beams kind of beam out around her legs. It's very cool. So let's put that in that position and go from there. Okay, we're on to step number 7. Now what we're going to do here is just play with some of these settings to get this sun flare, sun rays, sunbeams, get it all looking much more convincing. Let's grab the amount slider for a start, and as with all filters, what I would recommend doing is just grab the slider and crank it all the way to the left, all the way to the right, and you'll actually get a feel for what's actually going on. So we could leave the amount pretty high for now, just for the sake of illustration and seeing what's happening. If we grab the look and bring that down and bring it up, we can see that it's actually creating more of a kind of misty fog the further we go to the right. Go to the left, it's a more dramatic look, really punching those, saturating those colors. So for now, let's just leave the look just down slightly left of center. The number, if we reduce that, the number refers to how many beams of light there are, not the specific number, meaning if we go to 100, there aren't 100 beams of light, but there are more to the right, less to the left, and it comes down to what you feel you want to add in. Personally, I think that if you're working with something like a tree with loads of leaves, a higher number works well, because it's as if the leaves are blocking some of the light, dappling it, and the beams are coming through. An instance like this, I think a lower number looks more realistic. Now, once we've done that, we can actually apply the length of the beam. So if we come to here, there's hardly anything, push it all the way out to the edge. Again, it comes down to your own personal preference, how far you want those beams of light to go. The warmth, I always recommend bring this warmth up, because after all, they're rays of light. Sure, traditionally middle of the day, we see sunlight as white light, but internally we process sunlight as this warm thing. I think that it looks much better if you can actually boost this up into the yellow region. You see that from that cool white, it looks kind of uninviting. As soon as we go towards the yellow tones, I think that looks so much nicer. Now we've got a split line here, and below this we start to talk into the flare around the light. So we can bump that radius up, and you can see how the actual sun flare itself, that changes. The glow radius, that's the actual glow coming out from the sun. And I find that if you go further towards the right with that, it just softens that transition from the center point out, and it just looks a little more believable. So push that one up. The glow amount, again, depends on your image, but for the sake of illustration, let's be forceful with this. Let's really push it. And again, we have a control for the warmth. We can either go towards white or warm that up, because we're already bleached out there. You can't really see too much difference in the color there. Next up on our list, we have an interesting slider, penetration. How much penetration would you like? I'm going to keep this pro and just talk about the sun flare here. By playing with this penetration slider, you can actually change, if I put the sun behind him, how much it bleeds through what it sees as an object. If you see, I start to move that penetration slider to the right, the sun actually starts to come through the object that previously Luminar thought or said was a solid object. I'm not going to pass the sun through this. So I recommend keeping this slider to where objects that you don't want the sun to pass through are still recognized as solid by Luminar. So that would be my daughter's feet here, the shorts, etc. So let's keep the sun where it was before, and as we move that slider we can see what's going on. So I actually like it bleeding through just a little bit, as if it's wrapping around the subjects. That's nice. And the final slider, randomize, it's just going to change the rotation and randomize those beams of light. I'm happy with that. However, I know from experience that I've probably overcooked this, and it's really easy to do when you're just staring at the screen. And what I recommend doing is stepping away and coming back. So I'm going to take my dog, step away from the screen, and join you for the next step. What are you doing down there? You like chewing through my wires or something? Come on. Okay, I'm back, and looking at my monitor, I realised we've taken things just a little bit too far, but part of that was because we're wanting to demonstrate for you guys what's going on with the sunray filter. So I have taken things a little more extreme than I would normally, but that's the benefit of having this on a separate layer, because now we can come in, grab the filters amount slider and just reduce that. So if I take it all the way out, that was our before, that's our after, but we don't need to have all of that. We can come in with a little more subtlety and just choose what we would like. So maybe let's go with 70. It's still a bit strong, but this is about adding a sun flare, sunbeams. So let's keep it as it is. So let's now move on to the next step. Guys, steps 8 and 9 are simply just more finishing of the image. You could leave this exactly where it is, but for the sake of being thorough, I'm just going to make a couple of recommendations, and step number 8 is the first of those, which is adding a vignette. Let's add a new layer so that we're keeping our sun separate from everything else. So add new layer, adjustment layer, let's call that final touches. And let's come down and look for vignette, or up, look for vignette, put that in there. I've managed to drop in 2, get rid of 1. Now dragging to the left in Luminar burns in a vignette around the edges. So let's go heavy, then we can see what's going on. So if we reduce the size, so it's a tighter vignette, but then feather it out so it's softer, we can see that's without, that's with. It's far too strong at the moment, but we can see that our attention is being brought into the center of the image. So let's reduce the amount slightly. I still really like the fact that it's burning down darker the edges of the image. And another great thing about Luminar that Lightroom can't do without actually doing adjustment layers, that I really love, is so simple, is just click place center, and wherever you click on your image becomes the center of the vignette. How cool is that? So in this instance, rather than clicking it right on the sun, which is already a really bright point anyway, I'm going to click somewhere between these two guys here so that we have a bright area around their silhouettes. Awesome. Step number 9, the last step. You've stayed with me, good on you. So let's add in, for step number 9, a lookup table mapping, a LUT map. So basically what a LUT map does, and I love LUTs, they're fantastic tools for color grading. We already have a color grade on this, it's a very orange color grade, but using a LUT, we might be able to enhance that orangey warm feel further. So let's have a look at our LUT. We've got candlelight, that sounds like it should be good. Smoky, wow, that really adds a nice orangey feel. Genius, I don't feel that's quite right for this one. Why don't we add another LUT just for fun? Let's add in candlelight, and just subtly, and I do feel it's getting a little too contrasty, so I'm going to bring the contrast out there, and I am going to say that is done. And thank you very much for staying with me for this video tutorial. I hope you enjoyed that. If you guys are interested in Luminar, you may already have it, and this is just demonstrating to you how you can use that sun ray filter. However, if you don't already own this software and you're considering it, personally, I believe that the sunray filter is a standout reason on its own that this is well worth the investment. Currently, the investment is small, in my opinion. It's $60 US, $70 US, but with a code that Luminar have kindly given me to pass on to my audience, being you guys, you can use the code @sky10, @sky10, and you get $10 discount US dollars from the $70, which brings it down to $60 US, and I think that is an absolute steal. I've just recently done another video on Luminar, and I'm really impressed with this software. I'm using it more and more in my workflow. I recommend it to you guys. It is not perfection. It is not the key to every bit of editing you will ever want to do. I still think there is a valid place for particularly Photoshop, but this can certainly be an instead of Lightroom with the photo organizing, etc. But anyway, I'm going off topic on the sun rays. I just want to say thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate you watching this tutorial, and I and Maisie will catch you in the next one. Cheers, guys. Bye for now.